Ethan Walker slammed his brakes so hard, the truck screamed sideways across the gravel. He didn't think. He threw the door open and ran straight toward the old man who was about to be crushed under a 400-pound stack of lumber sliding off a rusted pickup. Ethan hit the pile with his shoulder, caught it, held it boots, skidding arms, shaking. The old man just stared at him. And neither of them knew in that one violent second that this stranger would soon hand Ethan the one thing he'd sworn he would never want again: love. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you believe one small act of kindness can change everything, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. The lumber held. Ethan's arms burned, but the stack held, and the old man was still standing, and that was all that mattered. "Don't move," Ethan said through his teeth. "Don't you move, sir. I've got it. You do not have it. Step back." The old man didn't step back. That was the first thing Ethan learned about Walter Hayes before he knew his name, before he knew anything, that the man would rather die under a pile of 2x4s than admit he'd bitten off more than he could carry. "I said step back. And I said I've got it, son." Ethan let out a short laugh, the kind that has no humor in it, and shoved his shoulder harder against the sliding weight until it settled back onto the truck bed with a groan of wood on metal. He held it there. His heart was still going like a jackhammer. "There," Ethan said. "Now it's got itself. Now you can argue with me." For a long moment, the old man said nothing. He was breathing hard, one hand pressed flat against his own chest, and Ethan watched that hand more carefully than he watched anything else. "You all right?" "Fine." "Your hands on your heart, sir." "My hand's on my shirt. You want to arrest me for it?" Ethan almost smiled. Almost. He'd stopped smiling easily a few years back, around the time his wife had packed 2 suitcases and told him she'd fallen out of love with the man he'd become. He didn't argue much with people anymore either. Arguing took a kind of hope he didn't have to spare. But something about this old man, the stubbornness, the pride, the refusal to be helped, even when the helping had just saved his life, pulled at a part of Ethan he'd thought was long asleep. "How long were you loading that truck by yourself?" "Since about noon." Ethan checked the sky out of habit. "It's near 5. Then I suppose I've been at it near 5 hours. By yourself." "You keep saying that like it's a crime." "It's a crime if it kills you," Ethan said. "And it damn near did." The old man finally looked at him. Really looked the way older men look at younger ones when they're deciding whether the younger one is worth talking straight to. He had pale blue eyes gone watery at the edges, and a face like an old leather glove worked and worn and folded, and there was in that face a grief so settled and so permanent that Ethan recognized it instantly because he carried a smaller version of the same thing. "Walter," the old man said, and stuck out a hand that trembled slightly. "Walter Hayes." "Ethan Walker." "You a contractor, Ethan Walker. You caught that lumber like a man who's been near lumber before." "Construction. Supervisor mostly these days. I used to swing a hammer for a living. Now I mostly point at other men and tell them where to swing theirs." Walter grunted. It was almost a laugh. "The great tragedy of getting good at something," he said. "They stop letting you do it." Ethan didn't answer that because it landed a little too close. He'd been telling himself for 3 years that the promotion was a good thing, that the extra money mattered, that a single father couldn't be climbing scaffolding at 40 when there was a little girl who needed him to come home in one piece. All of it was true, and all of it still felt like something had been taken from him and dressed up as a gift. "You need help getting the rest of this loaded," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "I don't need—" "I know you don't. Nobody needs anything near as I can tell. Whole world's just fine on its own." He was already rolling up his sleeves. "Where's the rest of it going?" Walter stared at him for a beat too long. And there was something in the way he stared, something calculating. Something almost hopeful that Ethan wouldn't understand until much later. At the time, he thought the old man was just surprised. Later, he'd realize Walter had been sizing him up for something else entirely. "Back of my property," Walter said finally. "Half a mile down. I'm building something." "Building what?" The old man's jaw worked. He looked away out across the flat gold of the field beside the road, and when he spoke his voice had dropped into a lower register. The register men use for the things that cost them to say. "A garden house," he said. "For my wife." Ethan waited. He'd learned to wait. People told you the whole truth if you gave them enough silence to fall into. "She's been gone 11 months, Walter said. "Cancer. The slow kind, the kind that lets you say goodbye 100 times before it's finally goodbye." He cleared his throat hard. She always wanted a little garden house, somewhere she could sit in the mornings with her coffee and her seed catalogs and not have to look at the television. "I kept telling her next spring, Ruthie, next spring, I'll build it." 41 years of next springs. His hand had drifted back to his chest, and this time Ethan didn't say anything about it. "I'm building it now. Bit late, but I'm building it." Ethan felt something turn over in his chest, slow and heavy, like a stone rolling off another stone. He thought about his own house, the one his wife had left the little handprints his daughter Lily had pressed into the wet concrete of the back step when she was 4. The way he'd started sleeping on the couch because the bed was too wide and too cold, and too full of a person who wasn't there. He picked up a board. "Then let's build it," he said. They loaded the rest of the truck together. It went fast, with 2 men, and Walter, for all his 80-some years, and his pale, trembling hands, worked with a steadiness that shamed a lot of younger men Ethan had supervised. He knew where every board went. He knew how to stack for weight. He didn't waste a motion. Ethan found himself watching the old man's hands and thinking, this is a man who has built things his whole life, and every board he's laying now is a board he's laying for a woman who will never see it. "You didn't have to stop," Walter said at one point, hauling his end of a long joist. "No. Most folks don't." "No," Ethan agreed. "They don't." "Why did you—" Ethan set his end down and straightened up and thought about it because Walter had asked it straight, and it deserved a straight answer. "Because you looked like a man who'd been left to do it alone," he said. "And I know what that feels like." Walter didn't say anything to that, but something passed between them, quick and quiet, the way it does between 2 men who've both been through the fire and come out the other side with the burns to prove it. They finished loading a little after 6. Walter leaned back against the truck, breathing harder than he wanted Ethan to see, and Ethan pretended not to notice, and that pretending was its own kind of respect. "You've got a ring line," Walter said out of nowhere. Ethan looked down at his own hand. There was a pale band of skin on his ring finger, the ghost of a wedding ring he'd stopped wearing, but that his body hadn't forgotten. 3 years off, and the skin still remembered. "I do," Ethan said. "Divorced or dead, sir. Your wife. Did she leave or did she die? Only 2 ways a man ends up with a ghost ring like that." Ethan laughed, and this time there was a little something in it, a little air. "You don't waste much time on small talk, do you? I'm 83 years old, son. I don't have much time to waste on anything." Walter's watery eyes were fixed on him, patient and unblinking. "So, left or died?" "Left." "How long ago?" 3 years. "Kids?" "A daughter, Lily. She's 8. Something moved across the old man's face when Ethan said, "Daughter," a flicker, a spark, some private thought catching light. Ethan noticed it and filed it away without knowing what it meant. 8, Walter repeated softly. "That's a good age, old enough to talk to, young enough to still think you hung the moon." He nodded slowly to himself. "You raising her alone?" "Her mother's around, sort of. She's got a new life 2 states over, sends birthday cards, calls when she remembers." Ethan heard the edge come into his own voice and tried to file it down. "It's fine. Lily and me, we've got a system. We're all right." "You're all right," Walter said, in the tone of a man repeating a lie he's decided to be polite about. "We are." "You cook for her?" "I keep her fed." "That's not what I asked." Ethan huffed. "I cook what I can. Some nights it's frozen dinners and cereal. Some nights I do better. She's not starving if that's what you're worried about." "I'm not worried about the girl," Walter said. "I'm worried about the man who thinks feeding a child from a freezer for 3 years is all right." And there it was, that thing. Older men can do that thing where they reach right past all your defenses and put a finger on the exact bruise you've been protecting. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to tell this stranger to mind his own business. But he couldn't because the old man wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. "I do the best I can," Ethan said quietly. "I don't doubt it." Walter's voice softened. "That's the whole trouble with good men. They do the best they can, and they decide that's the ceiling. They decide that's all life's going to give them, and they stop reaching because reaching hurt too much the last time." He pushed himself off the truck. "You want to follow me down to the property? I've got a cooler with 2 beers in it, and I'd rather not drink them both alone." Ethan should have said no. He had a daughter with a babysitter at home, a sitter he was already paying overtime, a whole evening of homework and bath time, and one more bedtime story to get through before he could collapse. He should have said no. "Yeah," he said. "All right, I'll follow you down." The property was 40 acres of flat Tennessee farmland that Walter and Ruth had bought in 1968, with money Walter had earned building other people's houses. He told Ethan this as they sat on 2 folding chairs at the edge of a half-built wooden structure drinking the 2 beers, and Ethan let him talk because the man clearly needed to. "I built every house in this county at one time or another," Walter said. "Every one but my own. You know why? Because a builder's own house is never done. You always see what's wrong with it. You always see the next thing that needs fixing. Ruthie used to say I'd fix that house right into the ground." He took a slow pull of his beer. "She was right about most things. I only figured that out after." "They usually are," Ethan said. "You were married how long?" 9 years. "Long enough to know better. Not long enough to make peace with it." Walter nodded. "What happened, if you don't mind an old man asking?" Ethan turned the beer bottle in his hands. He hadn't talked about it in a long time. Not really. He'd given people the short version: we grew apart. It happens the version that closed the conversation instead of opening it. But there was something about sitting next to a man who'd loved one woman for 41 years and then watched her die that made the short version feel like an insult. "She said I disappeared," Ethan said. "That's the word she used. Disappeared. She said the man she married had this fire, this thing where I wanted to build a life, build a business, be somebody. And then the recession hit and I took the supervisor job for the health insurance for the steady paycheck because Lily was on the way and I couldn't gamble anymore. And I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd get back to the dream once things settled down." He shook his head. "Things never settled down. And one day she looked at me across the kitchen table and said she'd married a lion and woke up next to a man who was just tired all the time. And then she left." Walter was quiet for a while. "You believe that?" he asked finally. "That you disappeared? Some days." "You didn't disappear, son. You just picked your daughter over your dream. That's not disappearing. That's the opposite of it." Walter's jaw set hard. Any woman who can't tell the difference between a man who quit on life and a man who sacrificed for his child, that's not a woman who left you. That's a woman who saved you some trouble down the road. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't exactly, because in 3 years of therapists and lonely nights and long drives to nowhere, nobody had ever put it to him like that. Everyone had wanted him to process it, to own his part, to grow. And here was an old man he'd known for 2 hours telling him flat out that he'd done the right thing and gotten punished for it. And something in Ethan's chest cracked open a little at the sheer relief of being told he wasn't the villain in his own story. "You're a hard man to argue with." Ethan said, his voice not quite steady. "I've had 83 years of practice." Walter finished his beer and set the bottle down in the grass. Then he was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Gotten careful, gotten deliberate, the way a man's voice gets when he's about to say something he's been thinking about for a while. "Ethan, can I ask you something? You've been asking me things all afternoon. This one's different." Walter turned in his chair to face him. "Are you seeing anybody?" Ethan blinked. "Am I? No. No, I'm not." "Why not?" "Because I've got an 8-year-old and a mortgage and a full-time job and about 4 hours of sleep a night. When exactly would I be seeing anybody?" "That's a schedule problem," Walter said. "That's not the real answer. The real answer's the one you don't say out loud." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, those pale eyes steady. You don't date because somewhere in that thick skull of yours, you've decided you don't deserve it. You've decided love is a thing that happened to you once and went wrong, and you're not going to be fool enough to reach for it twice. Am I close? Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. The evening was very quiet. You're close, he admitted. I thought so. Walter nodded slowly. I know the look, son. I've seen it in the mirror these past 11 months. A man who's decided the good part of his life is behind him, and all that's left is putting one foot in front of the other until it's over. He shook his head. It's a lie. It's the biggest lie a grieving man ever tells himself. And I'll tell you how I know it's a lie. How? Because I told it to myself once, long before Ruth. When I was young before the war, I had a girl and she died flu. That terrible flu that went around, and I decided at 19 years old that I was done. Finished. That I'd loved once and lost, and I'd never do it again. He smiled, and it was a smile with 41 years inside it. And then I met a woman named Ruth Ellen Carter at a church picnic in 1959, and every single thing I thought I knew about my own future turned out to be wrong. Every bit of it. He looked at Ethan. The good part of your life is not behind you. You just can't see the part that's coming because it hasn't got here yet. Ethan felt his throat tighten, and he covered it by taking a drink he didn't want. I appreciate that, he said. I do. But you don't believe it. No, Ethan said honestly. I don't, but I appreciate it. Walter laughed then, a real laugh, dry and warm. Fair enough, fair enough. He clapped Ethan once on the knee. Come back Saturday. What? Saturday. Come help me finish framing this thing. I can't lift the top plates alone. Lord knows I proved that today, and I'll be damned if I'm going to hire some kid who doesn't know a rafter from a rake board. He fixed Ethan with a look. You said you used to swing a hammer. You miss it. I can see it on you. So come swing one. I'll pay you in bad beer and worse company. And Ethan, who had 100 reasons to say no, who had a daughter and a job and a life so tightly wound there was no slack left in it anywhere, heard himself say, All right, Saturday. I didn't know why. He'd tell himself later it was because the old man needed the help, and that was true. He'd tell himself it was because the beer was cold and the conversation was the realest one he'd had in years, and that was true too. But the deepest truth, the one he wouldn't admit even to himself for a long time, was simpler than all of that. He didn't want to go home to the frozen dinner and the too-wide bed. He wanted for the first time in 3 years to have somewhere to be. He stood up, brushed the grass off his jeans. And then Walter said the thing that Ethan would replay in his head 1,000 times in the months to come. Ethan, one more thing before you go. Yeah. The old man was still sitting in his folding chair, hands folded in his lap, and there was on his face an expression Ethan couldn't read, half mischief, half something deeper and more serious, something that looked almost like hope. You said you weren't seeing anybody. I did, and you meant it. I meant it. Walter nodded to himself slow, like a man laying the last board of a plan he'd been building all afternoon. Good, he said. Ethan waited. When nothing more came, he frowned. Good, that's it, good. That's it, Walter said, for now. And Ethan drove home in the dark that night with a feeling he couldn't name, a feeling he hadn't had in years, the feeling that something in his life had shifted a quarter of an inch. Some small hinge somewhere had turned, and a door he'd nailed shut a long time ago had come ever so slightly unstuck. Lily was already asleep when he got home. The sitter, a college girl named Bethany from 2 houses down, gave him the report at the door. Homework done. Teeth brushed. One story read lights out at 8:30 sharp. She waited up for you as long as she could, Bethany said, gathering her things. She wanted to show you the drawing she made. It's on the fridge. After the sitter left. Ethan stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing. It was a picture of 2 stick figures, a big one and a little one holding hands under a yellow sun. Above them, in the careful, shaky letters of an 8-year-old, Lily had written, Me and Daddy. There was no third figure. There was no mother in the drawing. There hadn't been a mother in any of Lily's drawings for a long time now. Ethan stood there a while, Then he went upstairs and cracked open his daughter's door and stood in the strip of hallway light watching her sleep the way he did most nights. The way fathers do, when the whole crushing weight of loving somebody this much comes down on them all at once in the dark. She had her mother's dark hair and his stubborn chin, and she slept the way she did everything fully committed, arms flung wide, taking up the whole bed like she owned the world. "Hey, Bug," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "I met somebody today." She didn't stir. "An old man, cranky old guy, almost got himself killed." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "He said some things to me, I don't know, stuff I've needed somebody to say for a long time." He was quiet. "He wants me to come back Saturday, build him a garden house for his wife. She passed. Cancer." He watched his daughter breathe. "I told him yes. I don't know why I told him yes, but I did." Lily rolled over, murmured something, and went still again. "Don't worry," Ethan whispered. "It's just a garden house. It's just some wood and some nails. It's not going to change anything." He believed it too when he said it. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about it in a way he could not possibly have imagined, standing in that doorway watching his daughter sleep. Because Walter Hayes had not asked Ethan Walker back to that property on Saturday to build a garden house. Walter Hayes had asked him back to meet his daughter. Saturday came gray and cool. Ethan dropped Lily at his mother's. She lived across town and took Lily most Saturdays. Glad for the company, worried sick about her son, in the way mothers are, and drove out to Walter's property with a tool belt he hadn't worn in 3 years and a thermos of coffee and a feeling in his stomach he chose not to examine. Walter was already out at the frame when Ethan pulled up, and Ethan felt an old familiar gladness at the sight of the thing, the skeleton of a small building rising out of the flat ground. Honest wood, honest work, the kind of thing a man could point at and say, "I made that." "You're late," Walter called. "It's 7 in the morning." "Late for a builder. Ruth used to say the day's half gone by 7. But he was smiling, and he handed Ethan a nail apron, and they got to work. They worked well together. Ethan had forgotten how much he loved it, the rhythm of it, the ache in the shoulders that meant you'd done something real, the satisfaction of a wall going up square and true. Walter talked the whole time stories about Ruth, stories about the county, stories about the war. And Ethan listened, and something in him that had been clenched tight for 3 years began slowly to let go. Around 10, a car turned in off the road. Ethan didn't think much of it at first. He was up on a ladder driving nails, and he heard the tires on the gravel and figured it was a neighbor or a delivery or nothing at all. Then he heard the car door and a woman's voice, clear, warm, exasperated, calling out across the field. "Dad! Daddy! I swear to God if you are up on a ladder again." "I'm not on a ladder," Walter called back. "He's on the ladder." A pause. "Who's he?" Ethan came down the ladder and turned around, and there, walking across the grass, with a paper sack of groceries on one hip, and a look of pure suspicion on her face, was a woman he'd never seen before in his life. She was maybe 30. Dark-haired like her father must have been once. She had a strong, open, striking face. And she carried herself with a kind of squared-shouldered confidence that Ethan clocked immediately as the confidence of someone who has been underestimated her whole life and decided to walk into every room like she owned it anyway. She was a big woman, plus-size, full-figured, however you wanted to say it, and Ethan noticed it the way you notice anything about a person you're meeting for the first time, which is to say, he noticed it, and then he noticed a dozen other things. Her sharp eyes and her set jaw, and the way her whole body was already braced for something, and the whole picture of her clicked together into a single impression that had nothing to do with her size, and everything to do with the fact that she was plainly ready for a fight. She stopped about 10 feet away. She looked at Ethan. She looked at her father. She looked back at Ethan. And then she said in a voice flat with certainty, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." "Claire," Walter said, all innocence. "This is Ethan. He's helping me finish the garden house." "Uh-huh. He caught a whole load of lumber that near about crushed me on Wednesday. Saved my life. Isn't that something?" "That's real convenient, Dad." "Convenient? You almost getting crushed by a handsome stranger who just happens to be a builder, who just happens to be single." Claire set the groceries down on the tailgate of the truck with more force than the groceries required. Because I know you didn't ask him whether he was single. Walter looked at the sky. The subject may have come up. The subject may have... Claire pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and closed her eyes. Dad. We have talked about this. We've talked about a lot of things. We have specifically talked about this. We talked about it after the accountant. And the man from your church. And the God. What was the last one, the widower with the RV who wanted to take me to Branson? Now Roy was a good man. Roy was 61. He was young at heart. Ethan stood between them, tool belt on hammer in hand, watching this unfold with a slowly dawning and absolutely horrified understanding of exactly what had happened to him on Wednesday afternoon. He looked at Walter. Walter did not look back at him. Walter was suddenly very interested in a nail. He set me up, Ethan said. Not to anyone in particular, just out loud to the universe. The lumber, the beer, Saturday. He set the whole thing up. Claire turned to him, and for the first time her expression shifted from suspicion, aimed at her father, to something almost sympathetic, aimed at Ethan. 2 people who'd both just realized they were pieces on the same board. He's good at it, she said. He's been doing it for 2 years. He acts like a helpless old man and lures a decent guy in with some project and then... She gestured at Ethan, at all of him. Ta-da. Here's my daughter. Isn't she lovely? Wouldn't you 2 make a nice couple? I didn't say any of that, Walter protested. You didn't have to. It's the whole point. She crossed her arms. It's humiliating, Dad. For me and for whatever poor man you've dragged into it this time. She looked at Ethan again. No offense. None taken, Ethan said. I think. You seem nice. You've got kind eyes. That's exactly his type. Claire shook her head. I'm not doing this. I came out to bring you groceries and check that you hadn't killed yourself, and now I'm leaving before this gets any more embarrassing than it already is. She turned to go. And Walter, old stubborn, dying a little every day. Walter Hayes said quietly, in a voice with no games left in it at all. He lost his wife too, Claire. Claire stopped. Well, she left him, Walter went on. Which is its own kind of dying if you ask me. 3 years ago. Got a little girl he's raising by himself, 8 years old. Feeds her out of the freezer because he's given up on the idea that anybody's ever going to cook a real meal in that house again. His voice had gone rough. I watched him catch 400 pounds of lumber with his own body to save an old fool he'd never met. And then I watched him sit with me for 2 hours and let me talk about your mother, and he didn't check his watch once. Not once. Walter set down his hammer. I'm not trying to embarrass you, girl. I know I do it clumsy. I know I do it wrong. But I'm 83 years old, and I watched your mother die, and I have exactly one thing left in this world that I want before I go, and it's to know that when I'm gone, you won't be alone the way I'm alone. The field went very quiet. Claire didn't turn around right away. When she did, her eyes were bright, and her jaw was tight, and she was clearly furious at her father, and clearly moved by him, and clearly hating that she was both at the same time. That's not fair, she said. You don't get to use Mom to... I'm not using her. I'm telling you the truth. She's the only thing I've got left to swear on. Claire looked at Ethan then. Really looked at him the way her father had looked at him on Wednesday, sizing him up. And Ethan stood there and let himself be looked at, hammer in one hand, feeling like the most awkward man in the state of Tennessee. Is that true? She asked him. The freezer thing. Ethan considered lying, decided against it. Frozen lasagna last night, he said. Cereal the night before. My daughter drew a picture of the 2 of us, and there's no dinner table in it. Just us and a son. He shrugged, helpless. So, yeah, it's true. Something in Claire's face moved, just slightly, just for a second. Then she squared her shoulders again, and the wall came back up, and she said, Well, I'm sorry about your wife, and I'm sorry my father is like this, but I'm still leaving. She pointed at Walter. And you and I are going to have a long conversation about boundaries. I love you too, sweetheart, Walter said. Claire got in her car. She started it. And then she rolled down the window and, against every ounce of her own better judgment, called out, Ethan. Yeah, You want to keep helping him, that's your business. God knows he needs it." She paused, and there was in her voice, buried deep under all the armor, a single thread of something that wasn't suspicion and wasn't anger. "But I'm not a project, and I'm not a prize. So whatever he's told you I am, I'm not that, all right?" "All right," Ethan said. "I mean it. I believe you." She held his gaze 1 second longer than she needed to. Then she rolled the window up and drove off, gravel spitting behind her tires. And Ethan and Walter stood alone in the field with a half-built garden house and a whole lot of silence. Ethan turned to the old man. "You," he said, "are a piece of work." "I know." "That was the plan the whole time. Wednesday, the lumber, all of it." "I didn't plan the lumber," Walter said mildly. "The lumber genuinely almost killed me. That part was luck." He picked his hammer back up. "The rest of it, though, yeah, that was me." Ethan should have been angry. He had every right to be angry. He'd been manipulated, played, dragged into an old man's clumsy matchmaking scheme with a woman who wanted nothing to do with either of them. Instead, standing in that field, he found himself watching the dust settle behind Claire's car, replaying the exact moment her face had softened. The freezer thing, is that true? And the exact moment she'd looked at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes and told him she wasn't a prize. And Ethan Walker, who had sworn 3 years ago that he was finished with all of this, that love was a door he'd nailed shut for good. Ethan Walker realized he was still looking down the road long after her car was gone. "She's not going to change her mind," he said. "You know that. She made that real clear." "I know," Walter said. "So this was pointless." "Maybe." Ethan glanced at him. The old man had a look on his face, that same infuriating, hopeful, knowing look from Wednesday evening. "What?" Ethan said. "Nothing." Walter turned back to the frame and lined up a nail. "It's just for a man who says this was pointless, and who says he's not interested, and who says she's not going to change her mind." He swung the hammer, drove the nail home in one clean stroke. "You sure are still watching that empty road." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time in 3 years felt his face go warm. "Hand me the level," Walter said, not even looking at him, the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "We've got a garden house to finish, and something tells me my daughter's going to be bringing groceries out here again real soon." Walter was right. She came back the very next Saturday. Ethan heard the tires on the gravel a little after 9, and he came down off the ladder before he'd even decided to, and he was annoyed with himself for how fast he did it. Claire got out of the car with another sack of groceries and a face that said she'd spent all week talking herself into and out of this exact moment. "I'm not here for you," she said before he could get a word out. "I didn't say anything." "You had a look." "I did not have a look. You had the look men get right before they say something charming. I'm heading it off." She hauled the groceries onto the tailgate. "I'm here because my father is 83 and building a house by himself, and somebody in this family has to act like an adult about it. That somebody is me. It has always been me." "Okay. Okay. Okay," Ethan said. "You want a hammer or you want to supervise?" Claire stopped. She'd clearly come loaded for an argument, and he'd just declined to give her one, and she didn't know what to do with that. She looked at him for a second, then at the frame of the garden house, then at her father, who was very pointedly pretending to sort screws. "I'll supervise," she said. She supervised for about 11 minutes. Then she couldn't stand it anymore, and picked up a hammer and started nailing down the subfloor with a speed and accuracy that told Ethan she'd swung one plenty of times before. "Your dad teach you that?" "My dad taught me everything. How to frame a wall. How to change my own oil. How to tell when a man's lying to me." She drove a nail flush in 2 strokes. "He forgot to teach me how to stop him from meddling in my life, but you can't have everything." Ethan laughed. It surprised him how easily it came. "He means well," he said. "That's the worst part. If he were cruel about it, I could stay angry. But he does it because he loves me, and he's scared, and that's impossible to fight." She sat back on her heels. "You know what he said to me on the phone last night? Last night he said, 'Claire, when I'm gone, who's going to check that old furnace before winter? Who's going to notice when you're working too hard? Who's going to be there?'" Her voice caught just slightly, and she covered it by reaching for another nail. How do you argue with that? How do you tell a dying man to mind his business when he's only meddling because he can't stand the thought of you being alone? Is he? Ethan asked. Dying. Claire looked up sharply. He's 83, Ethan said carefully. He keeps his hand on his chest. He gets short of breath loading lumber. I've been on enough job sites to know what a bad heart looks like. For a long moment, Claire didn't answer. When she did, her voice was very quiet. His heart's failing, she said. The doctors gave him a year. That was 14 months ago. She looked out across the field. So he's already living on borrowed time and he knows it, and instead of being scared for himself, he spends every ounce of it being scared for me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist fast, like she was mad at the tears for showing up. That's my father. That's the whole man in one sentence. Ethan set his hammer down. He didn't tell me that part, he said. He wouldn't. He'd think it was cheating, winning your sympathy under false pretenses. A watery laugh. He wants you to like me for me, not to pity the poor girl with the dying dad. I don't pity you, Ethan said. Good. I mean it. 2 minutes with you and pity's the last thing on the list. Claire looked at him, and something flickered across her face, and for 1 second, the armor slipped, and Ethan saw the person underneath it, and then Walter called out from across the frame, "You two are awful quiet over there," and the moment snapped shut like a book. We're working, Dad, Claire called back, not taking her eyes off Ethan. Some of us. But she was smiling when she said it. They worked until the light went long and gold. And Claire stayed the whole day, and when she finally packed up to leave, she stood by her car for a second, keys in her hand, and said, "The garden house, how long till it's done?" "Couple months, maybe. Depends how much time we can put in." "So you'll be out here, weekends?" "Looks that way." Claire nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll be out here too. Somebody's got to keep him from falling off a ladder." She got in the car, rolled down the window. "This isn't what he thinks it is," she said. "You and me, it's not a thing." "I know. I just want to be clear." "You're clear." "Good." She started the engine. Then quieter, almost to herself. "You caught the lumber for a stranger. Most people would have driven past." And she drove off before he could answer. And Ethan stood there again, watching the empty road again. And this time, he didn't even pretend he wasn't. The weekends stacked up after that one on top of the next. And the garden house rose board by board, and something else rose too slower, quieter in the space between two people who both kept insisting it wasn't happening. Claire came every Saturday, sometimes Sunday too. She'd bring groceries and cook Walter a real meal in his kitchen and pack the leftovers in containers for him to eat during the week. And Ethan watched her do it and thought about the freezer in his own house and the picture on his own fridge with no dinner table in it. The fourth Saturday, she brought enough food for 3. "You're staying for dinner," she told Ethan. It wasn't a question. "My father says all you eat is frozen garbage and I refuse to be complicit. I've got to pick up my daughter." "Bring her." Ethan stopped. "Bring her," Claire said again, softer, like she'd surprised herself by offering. "She's got to eat too, and I made too much, and a kid should have a home-cooked meal on a Saturday." She turned back to the stove. "Or don't. It's just food. It's not a thing." "Everything with you is not a thing," Ethan said. "That's right." He brought Lily. He almost didn't. He sat in his car outside his mother's house for 10 minutes, hands on the wheel, arguing with himself, because bringing his daughter meant something. Bringing his daughter into this made it real in a way that swinging a hammer never could. Lily was 8. Lily had watched her mother walk out the door and had spent 3 years learning not to expect a woman in her life. He couldn't just bring her somewhere and let her get attached and then have it turn out to be nothing. But then he thought about the picture on the fridge. Just him and the sun. And he went in and got her. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "To help a friend of mine finish a house, and to have dinner with his family." "What family?" "His daughter Claire." Lily considered this from her booster seat. "Is she nice?" Ethan thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "I think she really is." The thing he was afraid of did not happen. What happened instead was that Lily walked into Walter's kitchen, took one look at the big woman at the stove, marched right up to her, and announced, "My daddy said you cook real food, and not the frozen kind." And Claire looked down at this small, serious, dark-haired girl, and something in her whole body changed. "Your daddy's right," Claire said. "You want to help me? I need somebody to taste the sauce and tell me if it needs more salt." And that was it. That was the whole thing. By the time dinner was on the table, Lily had appointed herself Claire's assistant, and by the time dinner was over, Lily was sitting in Claire's lap while Walter told a story about a raccoon that had gotten into the barn in 1974, and Ethan sat across the table and watched his daughter laugh. Really laugh, the belly laugh. He hadn't heard enough of in 3 years, and he had to look away for a second because his eyes had gone hot and he didn't want anyone to see. Claire caught it anyway. She didn't say anything. But later, when Ethan was carrying dishes to the sink and Lily and Walter were arguing happily over a game of checkers, Claire came up beside him with a stack of plates and said quietly, "She's a good kid. She's the best thing I ever did. You can tell. She's easy in her skin. Kids only get that way when somebody made them feel safe." She set the plates down. "You did that, by yourself. Freezer dinners and all." Ethan didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. "I'm going to say something," Claire said, "and then we're never going to talk about it again." "Okay. My father's not entirely wrong about you." She kept her eyes on the sink, on the water running on anything but him. "You're not what I expected. You're not what I get usually. The men I meet, they see me, and I can watch them do the math. They add up what they think I'm worth, and they always come up short, and I always know before they even say a word." She turned the water off. "You didn't do the math. You just brought your kid to dinner." She finally looked at him. "So, that's all. That's the thing we're never talking about again." And she walked back to the checkerboard before Ethan could say a single word, and he stood at the sink with his heart going like something had come loose in his chest, and he understood in that moment that whatever he'd been telling himself for the last month was a lie. This was a thing. It had been a thing since she'd stepped out of that car and told him she wasn't a prize. That should have been the beginning. Instead, 3 days later, the past came back. It came back on a Tuesday in the form of a phone call, and Ethan wasn't there for it, and he only heard about it afterward in pieces, the way you hear about the things that almost break something before it's had a chance to begin. Claire called him that night, which she'd never done. They'd never once spoken on the phone, and her voice was strange tight, and she said, "Can I ask you something weird?" "Sure." "Do you believe people change?" Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of his bed. "Depends on the person. Depends what they're changing from." "There's a man," Claire said. "There was a man, years ago. We were together almost 2 years. I thought he was it. I thought he was the one. And then one night he sat me down and told me he loved me, but he couldn't be with me because of how I looked. He said, and I'll never forget it. He said, 'Claire, I can't spend my life being the guy whose girlfriend is the big one.' He said it like that. Like I was a coat he was embarrassed to be seen in." Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone reciting a wound so old it had gone smooth. "And I believed him. That was the worst part. Not that he left. That some part of me thought, well, of course. Of course he did. What did I expect?" Ethan's hand had tightened around the phone. "He called me today," Claire said. "Marcus, after 6 years. He called to tell me he's changed. He's been in therapy. He's realized what he lost. He wants to see me. He wants to make it right." A shaky breath. "And I'm sitting here, and I don't know what I feel, and I don't have anybody to ask, because if I tell my father he'll lose his mind, and I can't tell my friends, because they'll just tell me what I want to hear. And so I'm calling you, which is insane, because you're the last person I should be talking to about this, and I don't even know why I'm—" "Do you want to see him?" Ethan asked. The line went quiet. "I don't know," Claire said. "Yeah, you do. I don't. I really don't. Part of me wants to hear him grovel. Part of me wants to prove I'm fine without him. Part of me, God help me, part of me still wants to hear him say, I was worth it after all." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she stopped hard, and Ethan could hear her breathing, trying to get herself back. "Isn't that pathetic? 6 years and one phone call, and I'm right back to being 26 and standing there while he tells me I'm too much to love. It's not pathetic, Ethan said quietly. It feels pathetic. It's human. That's different. He closed his eyes. Every part of him wanted to tell her not to go. Wanted to tell her the man was a coward and a fool and didn't deserve 1 minute of her time. But he'd learned something sitting in those folding chairs with her father. He'd learned that the fastest way to lose someone is to try to decide things for them. You want to know what I think? That's why I called. I think a man who left you because of how you look and comes back 6 years later saying he's changed didn't change because he grew. He changed because he got older and lonelier and looked around and realized the shallow thing he chose you over didn't keep him warm at night. Ethan's voice was steady, but there was iron under it. And I think you already know that. And I think the only reason you're even considering it is that some cruel little voice he planted in you a long time ago is telling you that you should be grateful anybody's coming back at all. The silence on the line was total. How do you know that? Claire whispered. Because I've got my own cruel little voice, Ethan said. Mine tells me I disappeared. Tells me I'm not the man anybody signed up for. Tells me I ought to be grateful for whatever scraps come my way and not go reaching for more. He opened his eyes. We've all got one, Claire. The trick is learning whose voice it actually is. Because I promise you it's never yours. Somebody put it there. He heard her start to cry. Not the controlled kind, the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep and old. I hate that you're right, she said through it. I hate it too most days. I'm not going to see him. That's your call, not mine. I'm telling you my call. I'm not going to see him. A wet laugh. God, I called you to help me decide and you just handed it right back to me. That's the only way it's worth anything, Ethan said. If it's yours. They stayed on the phone another hour that night. They didn't talk about Marcus again. They talked about everything else. Her job, his job, the garden house, Lily Walter, the strange accidental way the two of them had landed in each other's lives. And somewhere in that hour, the thing that had been not a thing quietly finally became a thing without either of them ever saying so. Just two voices in the dark, keeping each other company. And when Claire finally said she had to sleep, she said it like she didn't want to. Ethan. Yeah. Thank you for not telling me what to do. Anytime. And thank you for not driving past. He knew what she meant. She didn't mean the lumber. The next Saturday, Ethan showed up to the property early before Claire and found Walter already out at the frame, and Ethan could tell from 20 feet away that the old man knew. He had a look on his face, sly and warm, and worried all at once. She told you, Ethan said. She told me a man called her. She didn't have to tell me the rest. I've known that girl her whole life. I saw the look. Walter set down his coffee. Marcus. He said the name like a curse. You know I never met him. 2 years they were together, and she never once brought him around, and you want to know why? Because she knew. Some part of her always knew he was ashamed of her, and she couldn't bear to see her father find out. His hands had curled into fists on his knees. My daughter. My smart, funny, kind daughter hiding the man she loved from her own father because she was scared I'd see her be treated like less than she is. His voice shook. I'd have killed him. I mean that. If I'd have known, I'd have driven to wherever that coward lived, and I'd have. She's not seeing him, Ethan said. She decided, on her own. Walter went still. She told you that. She told me on the phone, Tuesday night. Ethan hesitated. We've been talking, some. The old man looked at him for a long moment. And then slowly, something came over Walter's worn face that Ethan had never seen there before, a kind of quiet crumbling, and to Ethan's alarm, the old man's eyes filled and spilled over, and Walter Hayes, 83 years old, put a hand over his mouth and wept. Walter, hey, Walter, I'm all right. He waved Ethan off, wiping his face, embarrassed and unable to stop. I'm all right, it's just. He took a breath. You have to understand. I have spent 2 years trying to find somebody who could see her the way I see her. And they all did the same thing. They looked at her and they looked away. Every single one. And I started to think maybe I'd die before I ever saw one man look at my girl and not look away. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. And then a fool caught some lumber on the side of the road, and I thought, well, one more time, one more try, and I dragged you out here expecting the same as always. He looked up. And you brought your little girl to dinner. And you talked her out of the worst mistake she could make, and you did it by handing her back her own good sense instead of taking it from her. His voice broke completely. You're the first one, in 2 years. You're the first one who didn't look away. Ethan didn't know what to say. His own throat had gone tight. I'm not, he started. Walter, I don't know what this is yet, neither does she. We're not. I know you're not. Walter got himself under control, wiped his face one last time, and when he spoke again, his voice was steadier, but no less serious. I'm not asking you to marry her tomorrow. I'm not even asking you to promise me anything. I'm just telling you what I see, because I might not have the time to tell you later. He reached out and gripped Ethan's forearm, and his grip was surprisingly strong. Don't do the thing I know you're going to want to do. What thing? The thing where you decide you're not good enough for her. The thing where you look at your divorce and your kid, and your freezer full of sad dinners, and you decide a woman like Claire deserves better, and you back away real slow, like you're doing her a favor. His eyes bored into Ethan. I've watched you a month now. I know exactly how your mind works because it works like mine did after my first girl died. You're already building the case against yourself, aren't you? Ethan couldn't answer. Because the old man was right. He'd been building that case for weeks. Every time Claire laughed, every time Lily climbed into her lap, every time the thing between them got a little more real. A voice in the back of Ethan's head had gotten a little louder, saying, she's got a whole life, a career, she's going places, and what have you. Got a mortgage and a kid and a heart that already got broken. Once get out. Now, get out before you cost her something. You're right, Ethan admitted. I've been building it. Then tear it down, Walter said. Tear it down before it's finished. Because I'm telling you, son, from the far end of a long life, the biggest regrets aren't the things you did. They're the times you decided ahead of time that you'd fail, and you walked away, and you called it kindness. He let go of Ethan's arm. My Ruth almost married another man. Did I ever tell you that? Nearly a whole year we were apart, because I decided a girl like her was too good for a broke carpenter, and I did her the great favor of leaving so she could do better. And she almost did. Almost married a doctor's son. He shook his head. You know what saved us? She came and found me, marched right up to my job site and told me I was a coward, and that she'd decide for herself who was good enough for her, thank you very much. He smiled through the last of his tears. 41 years. Because she was braver than me. Don't make Claire be the brave one. It's not fair to make the woman always be the brave one. And that was when Claire's car turned in off the road. She got out, and she saw the two of them standing close, saw her father's red eyes, and she went sharp and alert immediately. What happened? Dad, what's wrong? Is it your heart? Nothing's wrong, Walter said, wiping his face. Old man got sentimental over a house, that's all. Claire looked at Ethan, a question in her eyes, and Ethan managed to shake his head just slightly. It's okay. And she let it go. But she watched her father with worry all day, the way she always did, the way a person watches someone. They're already grieving in advance. That was the day everything sped up, because that afternoon, while Ethan and Walter were setting the last of the roof rafters, Claire's phone rang, and she stepped away to take it, and Ethan watched from up on the ladder as her whole posture changed, as she went rigid, as her free hand came up to cover her mouth. She talked for a long time. When she came back, her face was pale and strange. That was work, she said. Everything okay? Ethan asked. They offered me the branch. Her voice was hollow. Director. The Atlanta office. It's the job I've been working toward for 6 years. Corner office. My own team, more money than my parents made in a decade. She was staring at nothing. It's everything I said I wanted. Walter set down his hammer very carefully. Atlanta, he said. 4 hours away. Claire still wasn't quite looking at anyone. They need an answer in 2 weeks. There's a whole team already there. They want me to relocate by the end of next month. They said the way I've grown the regional numbers, I'm the obvious choice, they said. She stopped, swallowed. They said a lot of things. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Walter said, and Ethan heard the enormous effort it took the old man to make the words come out warm. That's everything you worked for. Yeah. You should take it. Yeah. Claire. I heard you, Dad. I should take it. Everything I worked for. I heard you. She turned away fast and started gathering her things, and her hands were not quite steady. I've got to go. I forgot I told a friend I've got to go. And she left. Just like that, in the middle of the afternoon, the rafters half set, and she drove off without hugging her father goodbye, which she had never once done. And Walter and Ethan stood in the unfinished frame and watched the dust settle. She's not happy, Ethan said. No. That's the best news she's ever gotten, and she looked like somebody died. I know. Walter lowered himself slowly onto a sawhorse, one hand drifting to his chest, and this time he didn't hide it. You want to know the truth about my daughter, Ethan. You want to know the things she'd never tell you herself. He looked up, and his face was gray and tired in a way that scared Ethan a little. She spent her whole life chasing that job, and every job before it, and every promotion and every raise and every corner office. You know why? To prove them wrong, Ethan said. The ones who looked away. Walter's eyes widened slightly. She told you that? No, Ethan shrugged. I figured it out. It's the same reason I took a job I hated and called it responsibility. When somebody decides you're not enough, you spend the rest of your life trying to build a monument tall enough to prove them wrong, and you never notice you stopped building it for you. He sat down on the other sawhorse. She's been running so hard for so long she doesn't know how to stand still. And that job's just more running. 4 hours of running away from the one place people actually see her. The old man stared at him. You, Walter said slowly, understand my daughter better after 1 month than men who dated her for years. That's not a compliment to me. That's an indictment of them. Walter laughed, but it turned into a cough, and the cough went on a little. And when it stopped, he was pale and breathing carefully, and Ethan was on his feet. That's it. We're done for the day. I'm taking you inside. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're gray as concrete, and I'm not explaining to Claire why I let you keel over on a roof. Come on. He got the old man inside, got him sitting, got him water, and Walter let him do it, which was how Ethan knew it was bad, because Walter never let anybody do anything. They sat in the kitchen a while, the same kitchen where Claire had made dinner, where Lily had tasted the sauce, and the light went down outside, and neither of them turned on a lamp. I need to ask you something, Walter said into the dimness. And I need you to be straight with me because I don't have the luxury of dancing around things anymore. Okay. How do you feel about her? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Straight, Walter said. I mean it. No hedging. I think about her all the time, Ethan said. It came out lower than he meant it to. I think about her when I wake up, and I think about her at work, and I catch myself saving up little things to tell her jokes. Things Lily said, stuff I see. I catch myself thinking, Claire would like this. Claire would laugh at that. And I haven't done that in 3 years. I haven't wanted to tell anybody anything in 3 years. And now I've got this woman I met 8 weeks ago living in my head rent-free, and I don't. He stopped, started again. And every single time I let myself feel it, another voice shows up and tells me to knock it off. Tells me she's got a whole life. She's got a career. She's got this job now, this huge job, and I'm a guy with a kid, and an ex-wife, and a heart that already got returned once. And what am I going to do? Ask her to give up Atlanta for the privilege of raising somebody else's child in a town she left. That's not love. That's just me being selfish and calling it. There it is, Walter said softly. Ethan stopped. The case, Walter said. You just built the whole thing, right in front of me, brick by brick. I watched you do it. He shook his head in the dark. She got the best news of her career today, and it made her miserable. And instead of asking why, you've already decided the answer is that she needs to be free of you. You've cast yourself as the thing standing in her way. His voice sharpened. Did it once occur to you one single time that maybe that job made her miserable, because for the first time in her life, she's got a reason to want to stay? The kitchen was silent. "You don't know that," Ethan said, but his voice had gone unsteady. "No, I don't, and neither do you. That's my whole point." Walter leaned forward. "You don't get to decide what she wants, Ethan. You don't get to look at her and me and that little girl of yours and do the math in your head and back away slow, like it's a mercy. That's the exact same thing Marcus did. Don't you see it? He decided what she was worth without asking her. He looked at her and did the math and came up short and left, and he called it honesty. And you're about to do the same damn thing, only you're going to call it selflessness, and it'll break her worse than he did, because she actually—" He caught himself. "Because you actually matter to her. Marcus never did, not really. But you." He sat back. "You're going to break something real, and you're going to do it thinking you're a good man." Ethan couldn't speak. Everything in him had gone cold and tight because the old man had reached right down into the exact place where Ethan kept the plan. The quiet plan he'd been building for weeks without admitting it. The plan to step back once Atlanta was real, to let her go, to be noble about it, to protect her from the mistake of choosing him. And Walter had just held it up to the light and named it for what it was. Cowardice dressed up as kindness. "What do I do?" Ethan said, and his voice barely worked. "You tell her the truth," Walter said. "The whole truth. Not the noble version. Not the version where you let her go for her own good. The real one. That you think about her all the time. That you save up jokes for her. That her leaving would take something out of your life you only just got back." He reached across the table in the dark and found Ethan's hand and gripped it. "And then you do the hardest thing a man can do. You tell her all of that, and then you tell her to make her own choice anyway. You don't ask her to stay. You just make sure she knows what she'd be leaving. And then you let her decide. Because that's the difference between loving somebody and needing them. A man who needs her says stay. A man who loves her says, here's my whole heart. Now choose with all the information, and I'll be all right either way." His grip tightened. "Can you do that?" Ethan sat in the dark for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. "I honestly don't know if I can." "Then you've got 2 weeks to figure it out," Walter said. "Because that's how long she's got to decide. And I promise you, son, whatever you're going to do it before she signs. Not after. After, it's just a sad story you tell yourself for the rest of your life about the one you let get away because you were too scared to let her know she'd already been caught." The old man let go of his hand, and outside in the dark, headlights swept across the kitchen window. Ethan looked up. "That's her car," he said. Walter smiled, tired and knowing. "She forgot to say goodbye to her father. She always comes back when she forgets to say goodbye." He pushed himself up from the table, slow and careful. "Go on, go outside. Talk to her before she talks herself out of it. That's my girl out there deciding right now in that driveway whether to run 4 hours away from the best thing that ever wandered onto this property." He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder as he passed. "Don't let her drive off this time without knowing. You've watched that road too many Saturdays already. It's your turn to be the one standing in it." And Ethan Walker stood up in the dark kitchen, his heart slamming the case he'd spent weeks building lying in pieces at his feet, and walked toward the door, toward the headlights, toward the woman sitting in her car in the driveway, with the biggest decision of her life in her hands, and no idea yet that the man walking out to meet her had just decided, finally, terrifyingly, to stop looking away. She hadn't gotten out of the car. Ethan came down off the porch and crossed the driveway, and she was just sitting there behind the wheel, engine off, both hands, still gripping it, like she'd forgotten how to let go, staring straight ahead at nothing. He tapped once on the glass. She flinched, then rolled the window down, and her face in the dashboard light was wrecked mascara, gone eyes swollen, and Ethan understood she'd been sitting out here crying alone, rather than come inside and let her father see. "I forgot to say goodbye to him," she said. "That's why I came back. I just forgot to say goodbye. He knows. I never forget. I always say goodbye. Because one of these days, it's going to be the last." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard. "Claire, come inside. I can't let him see me like this." "Then come here." And Ethan opened the car door, and she looked at him, and something in her just gave way, and she got out and stood there in the dark, and Ethan put his arms around her, and she let him. She actually let him. Her forehead dropping to his shoulder, and he held her while she shook. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm sorry, this is so stupid. I got the best job of my life today, and I'm falling apart in a driveway." "It's not stupid. It is. Everybody would kill for this. My mother would have killed for this. She cleaned houses. Ethan, she cleaned other people's houses her whole life, so I could go to school and get exactly this, and now I've got it, and I can't stop crying." She pulled back enough to look at him, furious with herself. "What is wrong with me?" "Nothing's wrong with you." "Then why does the best day of my career feel like the worst day of my life?" And there it was, hanging in the dark between them. The exact question Walter had asked 20 minutes ago in the kitchen, and Ethan had a choice to make right now in this driveway with her tear-stained face 6 inches from his and the whole plan he'd built lying in pieces behind him. He could give her the safe answer, or he could do the hard thing the old man had told him to do. "You want to know what I think," Ethan said. "That's why I keep calling you. I think you've spent your whole life running so fast that stopping feels like dying. I think that job's 4 hours away, and some part of you is relieved because 4 hours away means you don't have to find out what happens if you stay." He held her gaze. "And I think the reason today feels like the worst day of your life is that for the first time, you've got something here worth staying for, and that terrifies you more than any job in Atlanta ever could." Claire went very still. "Don't," she whispered. "You asked." "I know I asked. I keep asking you things I don't want the real answer to." She stepped back out of his arms, wrapping her own around herself. "You can't do that. You can't stand in a driveway and say something like that and then just—" "Then what?" Ethan said. "Say it." "Then nothing. Then I take the job and move to Atlanta, and it doesn't matter what either of us." "It matters to me." The 3 words landed like a stone in still water. Claire stopped. Her arms came down slowly. "What did you say?" "I said it matters to me." Ethan's heart was going so hard he could feel it in his throat, but Walter's voice was in his head. Don't let her drive off without knowing it's your turn to stand in the road. And so he kept going, even though every instinct he had was screaming at him to back off, be safe, protect himself. "I wasn't going to say any of this. I had a whole plan, Claire. I built it for weeks. The plan was, once Atlanta got real, I'd step back. Be a good guy about it. Let you go chase the thing you earned, and not be the anchor that held you here." His voice roughened. "Your father figured it out this afternoon. Called it what it was. Told me I was about to do the exact same thing Marcus did, decide what you're worth without asking you, and dress it up as being noble." He shook his head. "So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the scary thing instead. I'm going to tell you the truth, and let you decide with all the cards on the table. Ethan, I think about you all the time. All the time, Claire. I wake up, and you're the first thing in my head. I save up jokes to tell you. I drive out here on Saturdays, and I'm not doing it for the garden house anymore. I stopped doing it for the garden house weeks ago. I'm doing it because it's the only day of the week my life feels like it's got any color in it." The words were coming faster now, 3 years of dammed-up feeling finally breaking loose. "My little girl drew a picture last month. Just me and her under a sun. No dinner table, no mom, nobody. And last Saturday, she fell asleep in your lap, talking about the raccoon story your dad told. And on the way home, she asked me if we could come back next Saturday, and the Saturday after. And I realized my daughter's been drawing a family her whole life, and leaving out the parts she stopped believing in." His voice cracked. "And then you show up, and she puts you in the picture just like that. No hesitation, kids don't hesitate. She saw what I've been too scared to say out loud for 2 months." Claire was crying again, but it was different now. Quieter. Her hand pressed flat against her chest, like her father's did. "Stop," she said. "Please. Because if you keep going, I'm almost done." Ethan stepped closer. "Here's the part your dad made me promise to say. I'm not asking you to stay. I mean that. I'm not going to be one more person who decides your life for you. You've had a whole line of men do that, tell you what you are, tell you what you deserve, tell you where you belong. I'm not going to be one more. If Atlanta is what you want, then you should go to Atlanta, and I'll help you pack the truck, and I'll mean it." He took a breath. "But I'm not going to let you drive off pretending there's nothing here, because there's something here. There's a whole something here, and you deserve to make your choice knowing that. That's all. That's the whole thing your father sent me out here to say." The night was quiet. Somewhere a dog barked far off and went silent. Claire looked at him for a long, long moment. "You're the first person," she said finally, and her voice was almost steady, "who ever told me the truth and then trusted me to handle it." She wiped her face. "Everybody either lies to make me feel good, or they tell me the truth and then try to make my decision for me. You just—" She laughed, wet and disbelieving. "You just handed me the whole thing and stepped back. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Do you have any idea what that does to a person who's spent her whole life being managed?" "Your dad taught me," Ethan said. "This afternoon. He said the difference between loving somebody and needing them is that a man who needs you says stay, and a man who loves you says, 'Here's my whole heart, now choose.'" Claire's breath caught. "He said that." "He said a lot of things this afternoon. He was crying, Claire. Your father was crying in that kitchen because he said, 'I'm the first man in 2 years who looked at you and didn't look away.' And that undid her. Whatever composure she'd been holding on to collapsed, and she put both hands over her face, and Ethan didn't touch her. This time, he just stood there and let her have it. Because some crying is private, even when you're standing right in front of somebody. When she came up for air, she said, "I have to talk to him. My dad. I have to." He's inside, waiting up, pretending he's not. She started for the house, then stopped and turned back. "Ethan?" "Yeah. I'm not deciding tonight," she said. "About any of it. The job, this, you. I can't decide anything tonight. I'm a mess. I'll make the wrong call for the wrong reason." She steadied herself. "But I heard you. Every word. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Okay. Okay. That's the most I've got right now." "It's enough," Ethan said. And it was. She went inside to her father. Ethan stayed out in the driveway a while, leaning against her car, letting his heart come down out of his throat, and through the kitchen window, he could see the two of them, Walter and Claire, and he watched the old man reach across the table and take his daughter's hands, and he watched Claire's shoulders shake, and he looked away because it wasn't his to watch. That was Saturday. On Monday, she called him at lunch. "I told them I need the full 2 weeks," she said, no hello. "They wanted an answer today. I told them 2 weeks or nothing." "Good. That's not me deciding. That's just me buying time." "Still good. I talked to my dad Saturday night for 3 hours. Her voice was careful. "He told me about your conversation. The whole thing. He told me he made you promise not to let me leave without knowing, and that he told you not to build a case against yourself." A pause. "He also told me he set the whole thing up. The lumber, getting you out here. He confessed the entire scheme like a man getting his affairs in order." Ethan closed his eyes. "He's something else. He's dying, Ethan." The word came out flat and terrible. "That's what Saturday was really about. He didn't just want to talk about you. He sat me down and he told me his numbers are worse. He went to the cardiologist last week and didn't tell anybody. The medication's not holding it anymore. They're talking months now, not a year. Maybe less." Her voice was cracking. "He's been carrying that around by himself for a week so he wouldn't ruin my Saturdays. That's why he cried in the kitchen. It wasn't just about you. He's running out of time and he knows it, and the one thing he wants before he goes is to not leave me alone." Ethan sat down heavily on a stack of pallets. "Claire, I'm so sorry. Don't. If you're kind to me right now, I'll lose it and I'm at work." She breathed. "I just needed you to know why this is all happening so fast. Why he's pushing so hard. Why I'm such a wreck. It's not just a job offer. It's my father telling me he's got months left in the same breath. He's telling me he wants to see me happy before he goes. And now there's you and this, and a little girl who put me in a drawing, and I have got to make the biggest decision of my life in 12 days while my father is dying, and I—" She stopped. "I have to go. I have a meeting. I just needed you to know." She hung up before he could answer. The next 12 days moved like water going over a falls slow at the top, and then all at once. Ethan and Walter kept working on the garden house, but the old man tired faster. Now worked in shorter bursts, sat down more, and Ethan pretended not to keep count, and kept count anyway. Claire came every day now, not just Saturdays. She'd come after work in her business clothes, and change in her father's spare room, and come out and cook and sit with them, and the four of them, Walter and Claire and Ethan and Lily, fell into something that felt so much like a family that it scared all of them a little. On the 5th day, Lily asked Claire to braid her hair, and Claire did sitting on the porch step with the little girl between her knees. And Ethan watched from the yard and had to go stand behind the truck for a minute so nobody would see his face. On the 7th day, Walter had a bad spell. Couldn't catch his breath, went gray, and Claire nearly called an ambulance before he waved it off and made her promise not to. And afterward, the two of them sat on either side of him in the kitchen, holding his hands, and Walter, when he could talk again, looked between them and wheezed out, "Well, if that didn't just make my whole argument for me." And Claire laughed and cried at the same time and told him he was terrible. On the 9th day, Marcus called Claire again. Ethan found out because she told him herself that same night on the phone, the way she told him everything now. He called again, she said. "Marcus. He heard about the Atlanta job, somehow one of our old mutual friends, and he called to say, 'Congratulations,' and then he said, and I want you to hear this exact wording. He said, 'You know, I always knew you'd make something of yourself.' Like it was a compliment. Like it wasn't the single most condescending thing a person could possibly say." Her voice was tight with old fury. "Always knew you'd make something of yourself. As if I were a project he'd invested in. As if I owed the trajectory of my whole life to a man who left me because I embarrassed him." "What did you say to him?" "I said, 'Marcus, you didn't know I'd make something of myself. You left because you were sure I wouldn't be enough of anything. Don't rewrite it now that it's convenient.'" She let out a shaking breath. "And then I hung up. And you know what I felt, Ethan? For the first time in 6 years. Nothing. I felt nothing. The little cruel voice you talked about, the one he planted, I went looking for it, and it just wasn't there anymore." Her voice softened, wondering. "You did that. You and my dad and that little girl in these 2 weeks. 6 years that man lived in my head, and he just moved out. Because I finally had something real to compare him to." Ethan couldn't speak for a second. "Claire. Don't say anything sweet, I'm barely holding it together as it is." "I wasn't going to say anything sweet. I was going to say I'm proud of you. That's different. That's just true." The line was quiet. "That might be worse," she said thickly. "Proud might be worse than sweet." On the 11th day, the day before her deadline, Claire didn't come out to the property. Ethan noticed by 5 o'clock. By 6, he was watching the road. By 7, Walter, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, because he got cold easy now, said, "She's deciding, son. Today's the day she goes off by herself and decides. She's always done it that way since she was a girl. Big decision, she disappears for a day, comes back with her mind made up." He pulled the blanket tighter. "Nothing you can do but wait. Nothing I can do either. We had our say. Now it's hers." "What if she takes it?" Ethan said. "The job, Atlanta. Then she takes it and you help her pack the truck like you promised, and you don't make her feel 1 ounce of guilt about it, because that's what you signed up for when you told her to choose free." Walter looked at him. "You meant that, didn't you? When you said it, you'd let her go and be all right." Ethan looked at the road for a long time. "I said it," he said finally. "I meant it when I said it. But I'll tell you the truth, Walter, in the last 11 days, I don't know if I can mean it anymore. Every day it gets harder. Lily's got her in a drawing now. I've got her in every thought I've got. Being all right about her leaving felt possible 2 weeks ago. Now it feels like..." He stopped. "Now it feels like losing something I only just found." Walter nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's how you know it's real. When letting them go free stops being easy, and you do it anyway." He was quiet a moment. "That's the whole trick of loving somebody, Ethan. Anybody can want to keep a person. Takes a real man to want their happiness more than he wants to keep them. Even when it costs him everything." He pulled the blanket up around his shoulders. "I let Ruth go once, remember? Told her to marry the doctor's son. I meant it too. God help me. I stood there and told the only woman I ever loved to go be happy with somebody better. Worst thing I ever did, and the best thing I ever did all at once. Because when she came back knowing I'd loved her enough to let her walk. And that's what made her stay for 41 years. Not that I caught her. That I let her go and she chose me anyway. The porch was silent. The road stayed empty. She's not coming today, Walter said. Go home, son. Go be with your girl. Whatever Claire decides, she'll decide it tonight, and we'll all know tomorrow. He smiled faintly. One way or the other. Tomorrow we'll know. Ethan went home. He didn't sleep much. He lay in the too-wide bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman deciding his future somewhere across town, and around 2 in the morning. Lily crept into his room the way she did when she couldn't sleep, and climbed in beside him and said, Daddy, are you sad? A little bug. Is it about Claire? Ethan turned his head. Why do you ask that? Because you look at her the way I look at the dog at the shelter that I want, but we can't get. Lily said it with the devastating simplicity of an 8-year-old. The wanting face. Ethan laughed and it came out a little broken. Yeah, he said. I guess I've got the wanting face. Is she going to be our friend forever? I don't know, honey. She's got a big decision to make. She might have to move far away for her job. Lily was quiet a moment. But I put her in the drawing. I know you did. You can't put somebody in the drawing and then have them move away. She said it like it was a rule, a law of the universe, the way children believe the things they need to be true. That's not how the drawing works, Daddy. And Ethan lay there in the dark, with his daughter tucked against his side, and he thought out of the mouths of babes. That's exactly right. That's the whole thing. You can't put somebody in the drawing and have them move away. And he held his little girl and waited for the morning that would tell him whether the drawing was going to come true or break both their hearts. The morning came. Claire's deadline was 5 o'clock. Ethan went to work and couldn't focus, checked his phone 40 times, nothing. Lunch, nothing. 2 o'clock, nothing. At 3, his phone finally buzzed and his heart leapt, and it was just a supplier about a lumber delivery, and he wanted to throw the phone across the site. 4 o'clock. Nothing. 4:30. Nothing. At 4:45, with 15 minutes left on the clock, Walter called him. You need to come out here, the old man said, and his voice was strange tight, and Ethan's whole body went cold. Is it your heart? Walter. Is it? It's not my heart. Just come. Come now. And he hung up. Ethan left the site without telling anyone, ran 3 red lights, and made the 20-minute drive in 12. Claire's car was in the driveway. He didn't remember parking. He was on the porch and through the door and into the kitchen, and Walter was sitting at the table, and Claire was standing by the window with her back to him, still in her work clothes, and she turned around when he came in, and her face was unreadable, and Ethan's heart stopped. You took it, he said. It came out flat. You took the job. Claire looked at him. Sit down, Ethan, Walter said quietly. Just tell me, please. I've been dying all day. Just did you take it? Claire crossed the kitchen. She stopped right in front of him, and she reached up and put both her hands on the sides of his face, which she had never done, which nobody had done in 3 years. And she looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, and she said, I called them at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And I turned it down. The kitchen tilted. You? I turned it down, Claire said again, and now her eyes were filling. And before you say one word, before you start in with any of your noble garbage about how I shouldn't give up my dream for you, listen to me because I need you to understand something. Her thumbs moved against his cheekbones. I didn't turn it down for you. Do you hear me? I didn't do it for you, or for my dad, or for that little girl, even though I love all 3 of you so much it scares me. Her voice cracked. I turned it down for me. Because I sat in my apartment last night and I asked myself the question you asked me in the driveway. Why does the best day of my career feel like the worst day of my life? And I finally let myself hear the answer. What was the answer? Ethan whispered. That I've been running my whole life to prove something to people who were never worth proving anything to. That I built a whole career out of trying to make the ones who looked away look back. And I was about to do it one more time. Run 4 hours to a corner office to prove to a bunch of ghosts that the fat girl made it. She was crying now openly. And for what? So I could be successful and admired and completely utterly alone in a city where nobody knows me. So I could win an argument with people who forgot I exist. She shook her head. I don't want to win the argument anymore, Ethan. I'm done. I'm so done. I want to be somewhere people see me. I've got a father who's dying, and a man who saves up jokes to tell me, and a little girl who put me in a drawing, and I would have to be out of my mind to leave that to go prove a point to Marcus. A wet, broken laugh. I called and I told them no, and the second I hung up the phone, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 10 years. Behind her at the table. Walter had his hand over his mouth, and tears were running down into his beard, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. So no, Claire said, holding Ethan's face. I didn't give up my dream for you. I gave up somebody else's dream that I'd mistaken for mine, and I did it for me, and you just happened to be standing in the middle of the life I actually want. Her voice dropped. There's a difference. It matters that there's a difference. I need you to know I didn't sacrifice anything. I chose. For the first time in my life, I chose what makes me happy instead of what proves them wrong. Ethan couldn't speak. He put his hands over her hands, the ones still holding his face, and he held them there. Say something, Claire whispered. You're killing me. Say something. I don't. His voice wouldn't work right. Claire, I had a whole speech ready for if you took it. I practiced being okay. I don't have a speech for this. I didn't let myself write one because I didn't want to jinx it. So don't make a speech. Okay? Just. Her forehead came down against his. Just tell me you're glad I stayed. That's all. That's the only thing I need to hear. And Ethan Walker, who had nailed a door shut 3 years ago and sworn he'd never open it again, who had built a case against himself brick by brick and watched an old man tear it down, who had stood in a driveway and handed a woman his whole heart and trusted her to choose, closed his eyes and said the truest thing he had ever said in his life. I'm glad you stayed, he said. I'm so glad you stayed. I don't know what to do with myself. You're in the drawing, Claire. Lily put you in the drawing 2 weeks ago, and I've been terrified every single day since that I'd have to explain to my daughter why the person she drew moved away. His voice broke completely. You can't put somebody in the drawing and have them move away. She told me that. 2 in the morning. She said that's not how the drawing works. Claire made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. No, she said. It's not. That's not how the drawing works at all. And from the table, in a voice thick with 41 years of loving one woman and 11 months of missing her and 1 lifetime's worth of stubborn meddling, desperate hope finally coming true. Walter Hayes said, Well, it's about damn time. I was starting to think I'd have to stage another lumber accident. And all 3 of them laughed, and all 3 of them were crying, and outside the light was going gold over a nearly finished garden house that an old man had started building for the wife he'd lost, and had somehow, without ever quite meaning to, ended up building for the family he had left. The laughing didn't last, because Walter tried to stand up and couldn't. He got halfway out of the chair and his legs went, and Claire caught him before he hit the floor, and just like that, the whole warm golden moment cracked down the middle and the kitchen filled with fear. Dad, look at me. Look at me. I'm all right. But he wasn't. His lips had gone a bad color, and his breath came in short, shallow pulls, and his hand clawed at his own chest. Ethan, call an ambulance. On it. Ethan was already dialing, already giving the address, already dropping to his knees on the other side of the old man. Walter, stay with us. Ambulance is coming. You hear me? You just held out for the best news of my life. You don't get to check out now. Not. Walter's voice was a thread. Not checking out. Just. He grimaced. Just my heart reminding me who's boss. They got him onto the floor, got his head up, and Claire held her father's face, the same way she'd held Ethan's 5 minutes ago, and she talked to him the whole time, low and steady. Don't you dare. Dad, don't you dare do this today of all days. And Walter's eyes stayed open, and found her face, and stayed there. Claire, he said, save your breath. No. Listen. In case. He swallowed with effort. In case this is it. I need you to hear me say it while I've still got the wind for it. Dad stopped the ambulances. I'm not scared, Walter said. That's what I need you to know. I'm not scared to go anymore. I was. For 11 months I was terrified not of dying of leaving you alone. His hand found hers. And now I'm not. Because I watched you choose. I watched you pick the life that makes you happy instead of the one that proves a point. And I watched him. His eyes cut to Ethan. I watched a good man look at my girl and not look away. So whatever happens now, it happens to a man who got what he asked for. Do you understand me? I'm not scared. You gave me the one thing I wanted before you even knew I was asking. Claire was sobbing now, holding his hand against her cheek. You're not going anywhere, she said. You hear me? The garden house isn't even finished. You promised Mom you'd finish it. You don't get to break a promise to Mom. And something flickered in the old man's eyes, some last stubborn spark, and he said, No, I don't do I. And Ethan swore later that it was the thought of that unfinished garden house that promised to Ruth that kept the old man breathing until the ambulance came. They took him at 7:40 on a Thursday evening. Claire rode in the back. Ethan followed in his truck after calling his mother to pick up Lily, and he drove to the hospital with his hands white on the wheel, thinking about how a man could go from the happiest moment of his life to the worst in the space of a single breath. Walter didn't die that night. It was a cardiac event, the doctors said. Serious, but not the end. His heart was failing, but it hadn't failed, not yet. They stabilized him, admitted him, ran him through every machine they had, and around midnight, a tired cardiologist came out to the waiting room where Claire and Ethan sat side by side and said the words, "No family ever once," dressed up in the gentlest way she knew how. The heart was worse than they'd hoped. This would keep happening. They could manage it, buy time, keep him comfortable, but the direction was only one direction now. How long? Claire asked. She'd asked it before of other doctors. She asked it now like maybe this one would have a different answer. Weeks, the doctor said gently. Maybe a couple months if we're lucky and careful. I won't lie to you though, his heart's very tired. Claire nodded. She'd known. She'd known for 2 weeks for 14 months, but knowing and hearing are two different animals, and she sat there and absorbed the blow, the way you absorb a thing you've been bracing for, that hits harder than you braced for anyway. Ethan took her hand. She let him. I have to tell you something, she said, staring at the far wall. And it's going to sound terrible. Tell me. When the doctor said weeks, my first thought wasn't about my dad. Her voice was hollow with shame. My first thought was, thank God I turned down Atlanta. Thank God I'm not 4 hours away right now. And then I hated myself for making my father's dying about my own decision, like I need to be the hero of even this. She pressed her free hand to her mouth. What kind of person thinks about herself when her father is a human one? Ethan said. Claire, look at me. She did. You turned down that job the day before he collapsed. If you'd taken it, you'd be signing a lease in Atlanta right now, instead of sitting in this chair, holding my hand, while your father sleeps 40 feet away. And some part of you knows that the choice you made for yourself, the selfish choice, the one you made just to be happy, is the same choice that means you get to be here for whatever time he's got left. He squeezed her hand. That's not terrible. That's grace. That's the universe telling you that when you finally chose what was real, everything else lined up behind it. Claire looked at him for a long moment. How do you always know what to say? She whispered. I don't. I get it wrong all the time. He shrugged. With you it comes out right. I don't know why. It's been that way since the driveway. They stayed at the hospital all night. Around 4 a.m, Walter woke up and demanded to know why they were both sitting there looking like somebody died and told them to go home and sleep. And when they refused, he told Claire she was stubborn as her mother, and told Ethan he was whipped already, and they hadn't even had a proper date. And both of those things were true. And it was the most reassuring thing in the world to hear the old man insult them because it meant he was still Walter. Walter came home from the hospital 4 days later on strict orders with a bottle of pills and a portable oxygen tank and a stern lecture about no more ladders, no more lumber, no more anything. He listened to all of it, nodded at all of it, and the first thing he did when he got back to the property was ask how much was left to do on the garden house. "Dad, you are not working on that garden house. I didn't say I was going to work on it. I asked how much was left." He settled into a chair on this porch with his oxygen line and his blanket. There's a difference between building a thing and bossing the building of a thing. I've been bossing men my whole life. I can boss too, and that's what he did. For the next 3 weeks, while his heart wound slowly down, Walter Hayes sat on that porch and directed the finishing of his garden house like a foreman running the most important job of his career. Ethan did the climbing and the lifting. Claire did the trim work and the painting. She was better at the fine stuff than either of them. Lily handed up nails and screws and became, by unanimous vote, the official job site supervisor's assistant, which mostly meant she sat in Walter's lap under the blanket and pointed at things and repeated whatever the old man said in a very serious voice. "That board's not level," Walter would say. "That board's not level," Lily would announce. "It is level," Ethan would call down. "Grandpa Walter says it's not," Lily would report. And that was the end of the argument, because somewhere in those 3 weeks, Lily had started calling him Grandpa Walter, and nobody had told her to, and nobody corrected her. And the first time she said it, Walter had to turn his face away and pretend something was in his eye. They were the best 3 weeks of a lot of lives. There was a night about halfway through when Ethan and Claire finally had their first real date dinner in town, just the two of them, Lily with Ethan's mother, and a nurse sitting with Walter. And it was awkward and wonderful. Two grown people who'd skipped every normal step and landed straight in the deep end, learning how to just be two people at a table when they'd already survived a heart attack and a job offer and a dying man's dreams together. Halfway through dinner, Claire put down her fork and said, "This is backwards, you know. We're doing this whole thing backwards. Most people date and then meet the family. We met the family, moved in, emotionally adopted a child together, and now we're on our first date. You want to do it in order? We can pretend. Hi, I'm Ethan. I do construction. Hi, Ethan. I'm Claire. I turned down a huge job because your daughter drew me into a picture. That's a heavy thing to lead with on a first date. I'm a heavy woman. I lead with heavy things." She said it lightly, but there was a flicker in her eyes, an old reflex testing, waiting to see how he'd take the joke about her body, because she'd made that joke 100 times with 100 people to beat them to the punch. And Ethan looked at her across the table and said simply, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever sat across from in my life. And I mean that the exact literal way I'm saying it, and I need you to stop doing the thing where you insult yourself before somebody else can. Because the next time you do it, I'm going to argue with you, and I'm very stubborn, your father says so." Claire went still. "You can't just say things like that," she said. "Watch me. I've spent 32 years learning to say it first, so it doesn't hurt as much when they say it." "I know," Ethan said. "And you can keep doing it if you need to. I'm not going to tell you how to armor yourself. You earned that armor honest. But I'm always going to argue, every time. Just so you know, it's not going unanswered." He reached across the table. "Somebody should have been arguing with you a long time ago, Claire. I'm sorry it took this long. I'll make up for lost time." And Claire, who had been called difficult, and been called too much, and been called things worse than that, her whole life sat across a table from a man who called her beautiful and meant it the literal way, and she didn't have anywhere to put it, so she just cried a little into her napkin and told him he was ruining her makeup and her whole personality. And Ethan said, "Good." Both of them needed ruining, and they laughed, and it was both of them agreed later, the best, worst first date in the history of first dates. The garden house was finished on a Sunday. 3 weeks and change after Walter came home from the hospital. They drove the last nail and hung the last shutter, and Claire painted the trim, the exact soft blue that Ruth had picked out of a catalog 15 years ago. The color she'd circled and shown Walter and said someday, and Walter had kept that catalog all these years, that one page folded to that color, and when Claire matched the paint to it, her hands were shaking. They rolled Walter's chair out to it. He'd gotten weaker, even in 3 weeks, needed the chair more, needed the oxygen more, but his eyes were clear and sharp as ever, and they wheeled him up to the finished garden house, and he sat there and looked at it for a long, long time and didn't say anything. "Dad," Claire said softly, "is it right?" Is it how she wanted it? Walter didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was very quiet. She wanted a window on the east side, he said, so she could watch the sun come up over the field with her coffee. You put the window on the east side. You told me to. I know I did. He reached out and touched the doorframe, ran his old fingers along the wood. 41 years I told that woman next spring. Next spring, Ruthie. And she never once got mad at me about it. Not once. She'd just smile and say, all right, next spring, and mean it every single time, like it was the first time I'd promised. His voice thickened. That's who she was. She believed me 41 times in a row, when a lesser woman would have stopped believing after the third. He looked up at the little east window. I hope she can see it, wherever she is. I hope she knows I finally got to next spring. Took me till she was gone, but I got there. Nobody could say anything. Claire had her hand pressed over her mouth. Ethan had his arm around her. Lily, who understood more than 8-year-olds are supposed to, climbed into Walter's lap under the blanket and put her small hand over his old one on the doorframe and said, It's a really good house, Grandpa Walter. Ruth is going to love it. And Walter Hayes put his arm around the little girl who wasn't his granddaughter, but was, and he said, Yeah, baby, I think she will. That was the moment Ethan understood what the old man had really built. It had never been about the garden house. Ruth was gone. She'd never sit in that east window with her coffee. They all knew that. The garden house was the excuse. It was the thing Walter had used to stay alive, to have a reason to get up, to have a purpose in the months after his wife died. And somewhere in the building of it, he'd used it for something else too. He'd used it to catch a lonely single father off the side of a road. He'd used it to lure his own guarded daughter back out to the property week after week. He'd used a promise to his dead wife to build a whole new family for his living daughter, so that when he was gone, the last thing he'd built wouldn't be a wooden house at all. It would be the 4 people standing around it, bound together, so that none of them would ever be as alone as he'd been these last 11 months. Ethan understood it all at once, standing there, and he had to walk a little ways off so nobody would see him break. Claire found him a minute later out past the truck. You okay? I figured it out, Ethan said. His voice was rough. What he was really building, it was never the house. I know. Claire wiped her own eyes. I figured it out a while ago. The house was just the hook. He built us. That's what he did. He built us on purpose, board by board, and he did it while he was dying, and he did it so smooth, we didn't even feel it happening. She laughed, wet and amazed. My father. My meddling, stubborn, impossible father. He conned all 4 of us into being a family and called it home repair. He's the best man I ever met, Ethan said. He's the best man anybody ever met. She leaned into him. And we don't have him much longer. No. So here's what I want to do. She turned to face him, and her eyes were red, but her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who'd finally stopped running long enough to know exactly what she wanted. I don't want to wait. I know that's fast. I know we did this whole thing backwards. But my father spent the last thing he had left in this world making sure I wouldn't be alone, and I want him to see it finished. Not the house, us. I want him to see us be real while he's still here to see it. She took a breath. I'm not proposing, I'm not that far gone, don't panic. But I want you to move in. You and Lily. Out here or in town, I don't care where, but together. I want to stop pretending this is early days when it hasn't been early days since the driveway. I want my dad to fall asleep at night knowing his girl's got a family. Not a maybe. A real one. Her voice cracked. Is that insane? Tell me if that's insane. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. 3 years ago, he said slowly. My wife told me I disappeared. Told me the fire went out of me. And I believed her, Claire. I believed I was a man who'd used himself up, who had nothing left to give anybody, who deserved exactly the empty house and the frozen dinners I'd ended up with. He took both her hands. And then a con artist in a folding chair almost got himself crushed by lumber, and he looked at me and saw something I'd stopped being able to see, and he spent the last months of his life proving to me I was wrong about myself. His voice broke. So no, it's not insane. Moving in with you is the least insane thing I've ever done. The insane thing was believing I was finished. Your father cured me of that. Yes, Claire. Yes to all of it. Move in, move together, whatever comes after that. Yes. Claire laughed and cried and grabbed him and held on and over her shoulder. Ethan could see the porch, could see Walter watching them from his chair with Lily in his lap. And even from that distance, Ethan could see the old man was smiling that wide, knowing smile, the smile of a man watching the last thing he built come together exactly the way he'd planned it from the very first board. They told him that evening. They sat with him on the porch as the light went down, and Claire held her father's hand and told him Ethan and Lily were moving in, that they were going to be a family, officially out loud, no more pretending. And she watched her father's face to see what it would do. What it did was crumple and then shine. And then Walter Hayes said the thing that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. I need to tell you both something, Walter said. And I need you to really hear it because I don't have a lot of talks like this left in me, and I want to use this one right. He looked between them. When Ruth died, I thought my job was done. Man raises his kid, loves his wife, builds his houses, and then his wife dies, and he's just waiting his turn. That's what I thought I was. A man waiting his turn. His grip tightened on Claire's hand. But I had one job left. I just didn't know it yet. My last job on this earth wasn't the garden house. It was making sure my little girl was loved before I go. Really loved. By somebody who sees her. Because that's the thing that kept me up nights, Claire, more than dying, more than anything. The thought of you out there being the strongest woman in every room, and coming home alone to an empty apartment, and having nobody who knew that under all that armor, you're the softest, kindest, most breakable thing I ever made. His voice failed for a moment. I couldn't die with you like that. I couldn't. So I found a man who catches lumber for strangers, and I got him out here, and I let you two do the rest. He smiled through his tears. And now I can go whenever it's time, because I finished the job. Both of them. The house Ruth wanted, and the one thing I wanted. He looked at Ethan. You take care of them. All three of them, the two you came with, and the two you found. You hear me? I hear you, Ethan said. He could barely get it out. Say it. Say you'll take care of my girl. I'll take care of your girl, Ethan said. As long as I'm breathing, I swear it to you, Walter, on everything. I'll take care of her and Lily, and I'll finish whatever you don't get to finish. I promise you that. Walter nodded slowly, satisfied a foreman signing off on a job well done. Then I'm ready, the old man said quietly, and he leaned back in his chair and looked out at the finished garden house glowing soft blue in the last of the light. And he let out a long breath, the breath of a man setting down a weight he'd carried a long, long way. I'm ready whenever she comes for me. My Ruth. She'll come. She always came when I needed her. He closed his eyes and he was smiling. I finally got to next spring, Ruthie. Come see. Come see what our girl found. Walter didn't go that night. He was too stubborn, and besides he said there was still work to do. The moving happened fast, because Claire made it happen fast, and Claire made everything happen fast once she stopped running and started building. Within 2 weeks, Ethan and Lily had packed up the house with the handprints in the back step, and Ethan stood in the empty kitchen one last time and looked at the bare fridge where the drawing used to hang, the one with just him and Lily and the sun, and he took it down and carried it out to the truck, because a drawing like that you keep forever, even after the family in it grows. They moved into the farmhouse. It made sense. Claire said her father needed people close now, and the place was big enough, and Lily could have the room Claire grew up in. And so a house that had gone silent 11 months ago when Ruth died, filled back up with noise, an 8-year-old thundering down the hall, a man's boots on the porch. Every evening, a woman cooking real dinners in the kitchen where her mother once cooked, and Walter Hayes sat in the middle of it all in his chair, with his oxygen line, and soaked it up like a man who'd been thirsty a long time. You know what this is, he said to Ethan one evening, watching Lily chase the dog through the yard, while Claire called them both in for supper. This right here, this is what a house is supposed to sound like. I forgot. 11 months of quiet, and I forgot what a house sounds like when it's got a family breathing in it. He shook his head slowly. Don't ever let it go quiet, son. Whatever happens after I'm gone. Don't let this house go quiet again. Fill it up. Fill it all the way up. I won't let it go quiet, Ethan said. I promise. Ethan made a lot of promises to Walter in those weeks, and he meant everyone, and Walter collected them the way a man getting his affairs in order. Collect signatures one at a time. Deliberate, making sure each one was witnessed and real. There was one more thing the old man wanted, and he asked for it on a Tuesday. I want to see you two get married, Walter said. Just came out with it at breakfast the way he came out with everything. Before I go, I want to be there. I want to walk my girl down whatever we've got to walk her down, and I want to see it done. Claire nearly dropped the coffee pot. Dad, I know it's fast. I know you'll say it's fast. Everything's fast now, Claire. That's what happens when a man's running out of clock, everything gets fast. He set down his fork. I'm not going to make it to a proper engagement. A year of planning a big church thing, save the dates, and a caterer. I'm not going to see any of that, and you know it. So I'm asking, selfishly, as a dying man's one selfish request. His eyes were steady on his daughter. Let me see you married before I go. Let that be the last thing these old eyes get to see. My girl in a dress marrying a man who catches lumber for strangers. Give me that. And I'll go happy. I'll go the happiest man who ever lived. The kitchen was silent. Lily had stopped eating. Ethan looked at Claire, and Claire looked at Ethan, and something passed between them, a whole conversation in a single glance, and Ethan gave the smallest nod. Yours to answer whatever you want. I'm already yours. Claire came around the table and knelt down beside her father's chair and took his hands. Okay, she said. Okay, Dad, we'll do it. We'll do it here. In the garden, by Mom's garden house. Her voice was breaking, but her face was sure. We'll do it soon. We'll do it while you can still see it. And Walter Hayes, 83 years old, dying by inches, threw back his head and laughed the biggest laugh Ethan had ever heard out of him, a laugh with a whole life in it, and said, Now that is the best news I've had since the day you were born. They were married 11 days later in the yard beside the garden house on a Saturday afternoon in the same soft gold light that had watched the whole thing happen from the beginning. There wasn't much to it the way the world measures these things. A borrowed dress that a seamstress in town altered in 3 days flat when she heard the story. A handful of folding chairs, the same kind. Walter had been sitting in a day, he almost died under the lumber. Ethan's mother crying before the thing even started. A pastor from Walter's church. Lily in a yellow dress carrying the flowers, so proud she could barely walk straight. That was it. That was the whole guest list. But Ethan would tell you for the rest of his life that he'd never been to a wedding with more in it than that one had. Walter couldn't walk her down the aisle. His legs wouldn't do it anymore. So they did it different. They wheeled his chair to the front beside the garden house, and when it was time, Claire didn't walk down any aisle at all. She walked straight to her father first. She knelt down beside his chair in her borrowed dress, and she put her hands on his face the way she did, and the two of them had a moment that nobody else could hear. Foreheads together, and whatever passed between them in those few seconds was 40 years of a father and a daughter saying everything they'd ever need to say. Then Walter, with the last real strength, he had lifted his daughter's hand, and he reached out and found Ethan's hand, and he put them together. His girl's hand into the hand of the man he'd chosen for her, off the side of a road, and he held both their hands in his two shaking ones, and he said loud enough for everyone to hear, in a voice that cracked but did not fail, I give her to you, freely, gladly. The best thing I ever made into the hands of the best man I ever met. He looked at Ethan. Take care of her. I'll take care of her, Ethan said, as long as I'm breathing. I know you will, Walter said. That's why I picked you. And there wasn't a dry eye in that yard, not one, not even the pastor's. They said their vows beside the garden house. Ethan's were plain, because Ethan was a plain-spoken man, and plainness from a man like that lands harder than poetry. He told her he'd spent 3 years believing the good part of his life was over, and that she and her father together had proved him wrong, and that he would spend the rest of his days making sure she never once doubted that she was seen, that she was loved, that she was in the exact literal sense of the words, the most beautiful thing that had ever walked across his path. And when he got to that part, he looked right at her, and he said, And every time you try to say it first to beat the world to the punch, I'm going to be right there to argue, Every time. For the rest of our lives." And Claire laughed through her tears because she knew he meant it, because he'd been doing it since the first date, and he'd never once let it slide. Claire's vows were harder because Claire had spent her whole life keeping the softest parts of herself locked up where nobody could get at them, and here she was unlocking them in a yard full of people. She said she'd spent 32 years running, and that she'd have run right past him too, right to Atlanta, if a stubborn old man hadn't kept dragging her back to this exact patch of ground week after week. She said she used to think love was a thing you had to earn by being enough, by being successful enough, or thin enough, or impressive enough, and that Ethan had taught her that real love doesn't do the math at all. Real love just shows up and catches the lumber and stays. She turned to her father when she said the last part. "My whole life," she said, "you told me I was easy to love. And my whole life, I thought you were just saying it because you were my dad, because you had to. And I spent all these years out in the world collecting evidence that you were wrong." Her voice broke. "And then you found me a man who proved you were right all along. So this wedding isn't just me marrying Ethan, Dad. It's me finally believing you. After 32 years. I believe you now. I was never hard to love. I just hadn't met the person who was going to make it look easy." She was sobbing now, and so was half the yard. "You were right, Daddy. You were right about everything. You're always right, and I'm so glad." Walter Hayes in his chair with his oxygen line and his failing heart, and his whole life's work finished at last, looked at his daughter, getting married in the yard, beside the house he'd built for the wife he'd lost, and he said so quietly that only the people right beside him heard it. "I know I was sweetheart. That's the one nice thing about being an old man. You finally get to be right out loud." They were pronounced husband and wife beside the garden house, and Ethan kissed his bride, and Lily threw the rest of her flower petals straight up in the air and let them rain down, and the little gathering of people clapped and cried, and it was everyone agreed the most beautiful wedding any of them had ever been to, because it was so full of the thing weddings are supposed to be full of, and so rarely are. Walter lived 19 more days. He got to see them married. He got to watch the four of them live in that house together, really live in it for a little under 3 weeks. He got to sit in his chair in the evenings and watch Lily do her homework at the kitchen table, and watch Claire and Ethan learn the small rhythms of two people building a life, and watch his house fill up with the noise he'd told Ethan never to let go quiet. And on the 19th day, on a morning in early spring, with the sun coming up over the field, the way Ruth had always wanted to watch it, Walter Hayes asked to be wheeled out to the garden house. They took him out, Claire and Ethan one on each side, and they sat him by the little east window, the one Ruth had wanted, the one where she was going to drink her coffee and watch the sun come up someday. And Walter looked out that window at the sunrise over his 40 acres, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said in a voice that had gone soft and far away, "There she is." "Dad." Claire leaned in. "What do you see?" "There she is," Walter said again, and he was smiling that same wide smile, and his old watery eyes were fixed on something out past the window that nobody else could see. "Right on time. She always came right on time when I needed her." His hand lifted just slightly off the arm of the chair, the way a man's hand lifts to reach for someone. "I finished it, Ruthie. I finished the garden house. And I did the other thing too, the thing you always worried about. Our girl's not alone. Look at her. Look what she found." His voice was barely a breath now. "I did good, didn't I? Tell me I did good." And Claire, holding her father's hand, understanding what was happening, gave her father the only gift she had left to give. "You did so good, Daddy," she whispered. "You did the best of anybody. Go on to Mom. We're okay. I promise you we're okay. You can go." Walter Hayes let out one long, slow breath, looking out the east window at the sunrise, at the field, at whatever it was he saw waiting for him there. And then he was gone. He went the way he'd wanted to go in the house he'd built beside the family he'd made, looking at the sunrise his wife had loved, having finished every last job he'd set for himself in this world. There was no struggle in it. There was no fear. There was just an old man setting down a weight at the end of a very long road and stepping through a door he'd kept shut for 11 long months into a room where the only woman he'd ever loved had been waiting for him the whole time. They buried him next to Ruth 3 days later in the county cemetery, where half the headstones marked people whose houses Walter had built. Lily put a drawing in the casket, a new one she'd made herself. It showed 4 people this time, and an old man in a chair, all of them standing in front of a little blue house, all of them holding hands, and above them, in the careful shaky letters of an 8-year-old, she'd written, "My family." There was no one left out of that drawing, nobody at all. The grief was real, and it was heavy, and it did not go away quickly, because real grief never does. But it was a clean grief, the kind you can carry, the kind that isn't tangled up with regret or things left unsaid, because Walter had said everything, and finished everything, and left nothing undone. He'd spent his last months making sure that when the grief came, it would come to people who had each other to carry it with. Even his dying he'd planned. Even his dying he'd made sure his girl wouldn't be alone. The seasons turned. They kept the farm. Ethan gave up the supervisor job eventually, and started building again. Small custom jobs. Honest work with his own 2 hands. The fire his first wife swore had gone out, roaring back to life the moment he had something to build for again. Claire found work she loved closer to homework that didn't require her to prove anything to anyone, and she was better at it than she'd ever been at the job she used to chase, because a person does their best work when they've got nothing left to prove. Lily grew. She kept calling him Grandpa Walter, even after he was gone, kept talking about him in the present tense. Sometimes, the way children do, kept his memory alive in the offhand daily way that's more powerful than any monument. And the house never went quiet. Ethan made sure of that. He'd promised. And every spring, when the sun came up over the field, just right, Claire would take her coffee out to the little garden house with the east window, and she'd sit where her mother was supposed to sit in the chair where her father died, and she'd watch the sunrise, and she'd talk to both of them a little the way you do, and she'd feel them there. Not gone. Just on the other side of a door. It happened, all of it, because a tired single father driving home from a long day of work saw an old man struggling alone on the side of the road, and instead of driving past the way everyone else had driven past, he stopped. He got out. He caught the lumber. He did one small thing that cost him nothing and changed everything, and he had no way of knowing in that violent stopped truck second that the stranger he was saving would turn out to be the man who saved him right back. That's the thing. Ethan Walker came to understand, and the thing he told Lily when she was old enough to ask how it all began. The biggest things in a life almost never announce themselves. They don't come with warnings. They come disguised as small moments, as inconveniences, as a stranger who needs a hand, and an evening you could just as easily have driven past. And the whole difference between the life you get and the life you miss comes down to one thing, and one thing only: whether or not you stop. Ethan Walker stopped. And because he stopped, a lonely man got his fire back, and a woman who'd spent her whole life being told she was too much finally met someone who thought she was exactly enough. And a little girl got a mother and a grandfather. She chose herself, and a dying man got to finish the one job that mattered more to him than his own life. All of it, every bit of it, because one man on one ordinary evening decided a stranger's trouble was worth stopping for. She was never hard to love. She only ever needed someone who refused to look away. And the man who refused had spent 3 years believing he had nothing left to give, right up until the moment an old man taught him that the best part of a life doesn't lie behind you at all. It waits quiet and patient on the side of some ordinary road for the day you're finally brave enough to stop.